Welcome to the CBS This Morning podcast. I'm Roxana Saberi, a CBS News foreign correspondent based in London. This summer has seen an unprecedented heat wave in the Pacific Northwest, deadly flash flooding in Germany, record-breaking rainfall in the Northeast, and wildfires raging in California and Greece. A dire report issued Monday by more than 230 scientists convened by the United Nations warned this will probably be the new normal because of climate change, unless we act quickly and drastically. The report provides a very detailed and comprehensive analysis of how climate change is changing our planet and what the future may look like. To help us better understand the nearly 4,000-page report and its implications is CBS News meteorologist and climate specialist Jeff Berardelli. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Roxana, glad to be here.
So the report issued by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was approved by 195 governments and based on more than 14,000 studies. Why is it so significant?
Well, what we know right now, and we see it all around us, is climate change is not in the distant future. It's not far away from home. It's happening in our backyards, and it's happening right now. And it's likely happening slightly faster in terms of the impacts than even a lot of the climate scientists have predicted. A case in point, the unprecedented heat wave in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia. I will tell you, as a meteorologist who's been, in this business 25 years and been studying this since I'm very young. I've wanted to be a meteorologist since I'm 3 years old. So I've been watching everything very closely for a long time, that I and many of us didn't even think it was possible to have that kind of heat. 121 degrees in Canada? Anybody should look at that and say, that doesn't even seem physically possible. Well, what used to not be physically possible is now not only possible, but it's probable because of human-caused climate change.
And this report, in fact, says it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Why is that a big deal?
Some past reports have said we're very confident. The last report did mention unequivocal, but unequivocal doesn't allow for any wiggle room with climate deniers or climate skeptics. It is 100% humans that are causing climate change. And of the warming, 100% of it is human caused. So it's not, 10% natural or 5% natural. It's 100% humans that are causing the climate to warm.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I also have heard the argument that, well, in the past, we have seen cycles of the warming of the earth like we are now. So how can we prove that it's, different this time or that humans are to blame? Is what we're experiencing unprecedented?
It's unique in the record. We're seeing faster warming rates than in thousands of years. Temperatures today are higher than they've been in 125,000 years. And in just a couple of decades, they will be warmer than they were over 3 million years ago. That's pretty likely unless we literally put the brakes on warming tomorrow. Also, carbon dioxide is higher than it's been in at least 2 million years. We have fossilized records. That's how we can tell. We call them proxy records. We have paleoclimatology. It's a whole field in climatology. We can look back in the past and see what happened. Now, yes, there have been times it's been warmer, but it took a while to get that warm. And then it took a while to cool off again in between, ice ages. This has happened all in 150 years. That is completely unprecedented. And we're like guinea pigs. We're sabotaging our future. We're kind of playing Russian roulette with our existence.
This is all sounding very dire, very scary, very bleak. And one of the things that the report found along those lines was that some of the changes we're seeing have already been locked in and irreversible. What are those changes?
Yeah, so some are and some aren't. One thing I should say right off the bat is we can stop the warming tomorrow if we stop emitting carbon dioxide and methane tomorrow. That's how quickly the climate system will respond. It will stop warming. But one thing we can't stop is all the heat that's been absorbed in the ocean. So about 90% of the heat, excess heat that we've trapped because of human-caused climate change, that's stuck in the ocean. And the ocean is very slow. It's like a Mack truck trying to stop it on a highway, or the Titanic, a big ship trying to stop it. It is basically locked in that system for hundreds of years, could be close to 1,000 years. So that means that heat will continue to melt ice sheets, and it will continue to raise sea level for at least 500 to 1,000 years, no matter what we do. So we've locked in, likely meters of sea level rise. But the real question is, are we going to see that sea level rise over the course of 500 years or 50 years? And that's the difference, right? Because we see it in 50 years, we cannot adapt. Society will be thrown into chaos because you'll have hundreds of millions of people displaced from their homes, trying to migrate into other countries. It will cause international conflict. But if we do it over 500 years, society is a breeze. Society will figure out how to adapt over the course of time. Although it will be sad to come back on Earth 500 years from now and for Lower Manhattan to be under 40 or 50 feet of water. But it is, so that's one thing we need to keep in mind is the decisions we have already made and the ones that we're making today really have kind of unfortunately locked in these impacts for future generations. So our children, but to a greater degree, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, their grandchildren. We've made decisions for future generations, which is not fair.
Right. But we're really at a pivotal point, our generation, aren't we?
Absolutely. I mean, look, you always hear people who love to deny climate change or fight back against climate change, argue that there are these politicians and scientists who claim we only have 9 years until the world ends. Well, that's not the case. We don't have 9 years until the world ends. We have 9 years to keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. At this point, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Why 1.5? Well, that was a number chosen by the folks at the IPCC with negotiations in different countries. 1.5 degrees Celsius is not going to mean the end of the United States, but 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius could mean the end of a Pacific island nation. Why? Because 2-3 feet of sea level rise will make it uninhabitable. So these countries are fighting for lower targets. Now, 2 Celsius is a situation where it's bleak for a lot of folks. 2 Celsius is a point at which it really starts to wreak havoc on human systems. And we get to 3 or 4, then we're really in trouble. So right now, in the next couple of decades, we have an opportunity to keep warming to such that we could adapt to it and hopefully not throw everything into chaos. If we allow this to get to 2.5, 3 degrees Celsius or more, it is questionable what the future is going to look like for not only us, but all living creatures.
So I want to get a little later to what we can do to keep from getting to this catastrophic situation with high temperatures. But before I do, let's go back to this 1.5 degrees Celsius, which for Americans is, I think, 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit or so. That is what the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015 had set as its lower target for keeping the global warming to this century over the pre-industrial levels. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's not necessarily a timetable on it. We just want to keep warming point blank below 1.5 Celsius.
Because over that level, the world looks very different.
It does. It's already starting to look different. Look what's happening in Greece and all across the Mediterranean right now with the fires in Turkey. I mean, pretty crazy pictures coming out of there. Look at Western Europe. 1,000-year-old villages not wiped off the map, but destroyed. I mean, think about the history we're destroying right now. And in the West, the Dixie Fire in California, the largest single fire in California history. And it's the beginning of August, which is the beginning of traditional fire season. We're not even in the middle or end of fire season. We already have the biggest single fire. I say single fire because last year we had a complex fire, meaning a couple of fires that merged into one fire. And that became the biggest, fire in California history. This one is half that size already, and it's only one fire. And it's only the beginning of August, which traditionally was the beginning of fire season a decade or two ago. But now fire season is almost all year round because of human-caused climate change. Basically, what's happening here is, it's not necessarily that it's raining less, although in some cases it is raining a little less. What it is the warmer the atmosphere is, the more it evaporates moisture out of the soil and out of the plants. And so we have this really long-term drought, the worst in 1,200 years across the west coast of the United States. And the warmer it gets, the more it strips moisture out of the soil and out of vegetation. And the more it makes these fires burn at a greater intensity. So they create their own weather. They create their own thunderstorms with no rain, but lots of lightning, which creates more fires right next to it. It's impossible to contain these fires. And you hear firefighters over and over again say, I have never seen anything like this. This is extreme fire behavior, and we are overwhelmed. We don't have the resources to deal with this.
This is extreme fire behavior, and these are extreme weather events, but are they not going to be extreme in a couple of decades? They're going to be routine?
Absolutely. Yes. So that's the thing, right? So let's take heat waves, for instance. A heat wave today of, let's say, a 50-year magnitude. So let's say a heat wave we may expect for a certain location to only see once every 50 years. That is now 5 times more likely today than it was in the late 1800s. 5 times. And heat waves like the Pacific Northwest heat wave, which I got to tell you, it is still to this day, I'm shocked that it was even able to happen. And that's how extraordinary it was. Those type of heat waves are going to become a lot more likely. These unprecedented events that couldn't have happened if not for climate change, are just going to become more and more likely. So that event, even in today's climate-based say, is a 1 in 1,000 year event, even in today's warmer climate. In a climate back in the 1800s, that was a 1 in 150,000 year event. As we move forward, these type of events that almost seem like they're physically impossible are going to just start happening routinely. And especially once we pass the 2 degrees Celsius mark.
Jeff, the report laid out 5 possible climate scenarios for our future. What are they?
Basically, every cycle that they release this report, the IPCC, and it's every 5, 6, 7 years or so, they run a suite of computer models, really sophisticated models with big equations. And as time has gone on, these computer models get better and better. So they ran about 100 different computer models, each one of them over and over and over again. And every time they run the computer model, they get a slightly different result. But they start with a set of assumptions. And each one of these 5 paths have different assumptions. The lowest path, the number 1, if you will, that assumes that we're going to emit very little and that we're going to reduce our emissions very quickly. And then it goes all the way up to the 5th emission scenario, which assumes that we're going to increase our emissions. We're going to have more burning of coal and more burning of gas in the future. And therefore, our emissions will continue to rise. And then everything else in between is slightly more realistic, right? So we try to have a lower bound with the emission scenario 1, an upper bound with emission scenario 5, and then we try to give a most realistic case, which is right there in the middle. And so we have to do that because the one thing we don't know that's most unpredictable is how humans will react in the next 10, 20 years. Will we really take a lot of action? Will the economics be there for renewable energy to scale very, very quickly? Or are we going to end up with some dictators running the world and they just want to, use oil for the rest of the century, and then we're really in big trouble. So that's what these scenarios are. And they all paint a different picture. The lowest scenario, we hit 1.5 briefly, and then we fall back below as the Earth starts to cool again. The highest scenario, we get to like 5.7 degrees Celsius, which would be absolutely disastrous. We don't think that's going to happen. We also don't think scenario 1, the lowest one, will happen. But the one in the middle warms us at somewhere around 3 degrees Celsius, give or take. And that's really what we're looking at. If you look at what countries are doing right now, the pledges they have offered, how well they're sticking to their pledges, the willpower that is in society right now, we're probably looking at this moment at 3 degrees Celsius, which would mean a very difficult future. That's why we're really pushing as hard as we can to try to stay below 2 degrees Celsius.
When you say 3 degrees Celsius, that would be this century, right?
Well, not necessarily, but probably. All of it depends upon us. It really does. But that's also the good news, because we have the power to literally just turn the wheel, because we have the technology, we have the climate cure. Roxana, I think about this a lot, like the COVID vaccine. We have the climate vaccine. We just need to take it. But we're seeing that not everybody is on board with the COVID vaccine, and certainly not everybody's on board with the climate vaccine. Now, you can't take the climate vaccine individually. You have to really compel your governments, because it's policy at the local and especially national level that'll help us.
With the pledges that have been made so far by governments, we're somewhere in between, but still that world is a lot hotter than it is now, and we will be seeing a lot more extreme weather events.
I mean, look, you might say to yourself, well, okay, big deal. It's 6, 7 Fahrenheit warmer than it is today. So instead of being 80, it's 87. I mean, I don't like 87, but I'll deal with 87. But that's not the way it works. Because first of all, heat waves they scale by about twice as much. So first of all, heat waves that might have been 90 degrees would be 105 degrees, or heat waves that are 100 would be 115. But beyond that, you can already see how the impacts are exponential. Look at fires. They didn't just go from like a few fires to like a few more fires. It went from like a few small fires to a bunch of large gargantuan fires, right? So it's not so much that we're going to see linear impacts here. We're going to see compound impacts, hurricanes happening, and then the next day, a big heat wave happening, so that, so your resources are stretched really thin. You don't have the ability to react to these kind of things. Everything kind of happening on top of each other, and the breakdown of human systems. And that's what I think people don't understand. When you look at climate change, well, okay, there's fires. I'll just move away from a place that has fires. Well, it's hot. Okay, I'll just move further north. Well, there's hurricanes. All right, I'll just move away from the coast. But that's not the big concern going forward. Those are individual events. The big concern is that we won't have the ability to grow the food that we need. We won't have the ability to supply water in certain places where people really need it. All of a sudden, people become desperate. They start to look out for themselves more than they ever did. It breaks down society and, the fundamental systems that support life. Those are the things we need to worry about once we get past 2-3 degrees Celsius of warming.
So every degree or even fraction of a degree that the world warms, the effect is felt exponentially in every region of the world. That sounds like what you're saying.
Yes. There's not necessarily a climate cliff. It's not like we get to 1.5 degrees and all of a sudden, the world falls off a climate cliff. It generally doesn't work that way. But you're right. Every fraction of a degree makes things that much worse. But every fraction degree that we stop the Earth from warming also makes our life that much better than it could have been.
So let's talk about that. You talked about the climate vaccine. What is that vaccine? What can we do?
Yeah, the vaccine we have it. It's clean energy. We can do a tremendous good by switching over our electricity sector completely to clean energy. It's driving electric cars. It's making sure that our power system is powered by clean energy and not fossil fuels. I mean, that is like 90% of the way. And we have to deal with, decarbonizing cement and steel and shipping and airlines, which are a few percent of the carbon footprint. But yeah, most of it is just electrifying everything that we can possibly electrify and making sure that electricity is provided through clean energy sources. That really is it. And we have it. It's here. It's just a matter of investing the money and subsidizing it. So clean energy is as inexpensive in most cases, or more inexpensive than fossil fuels right now. Couldn't have said that 10 years ago, couldn't have said that 20 years ago, but right now we can say that. In addition, it's cleaner, right? You don't end up burning and polluting the atmosphere and causing all these unnecessary deaths across the world, because we see thousands and thousands of deaths due to pollution every single year. And then lastly, it's a huge job creator. A lot of these industries, you can't really ship wind, I mean, wind is wind. It's going to be created in Kansas or in Texas. So you need technicians to work on those wind turbines. So study after study finds that clean energy produces a lot more jobs, energy efficiency, clean energy, than fossil fuels do. So the one thing we have to deal with, Roxana, though, is there are a lot of folks still working in fossil fuels. Now, eventually, they will need to be transitioned out of their jobs. And it's really imperative that we acknowledge the contribution that they've given to modern society, because they have built a modern society on their backs and on their shoulders. So we need to absolutely take care of these folks. And at the same time, we still need to transition to clean energy to save ourselves, our climate, our children from health impacts, and to create a better, more thriving economy in the future. And that will happen if we turn the corner.
So the hope is that clean energy will help us limit our carbon emissions. What about methane? That was also mentioned in the report. There's been a sharp rise in methane emissions in recent years.
There's two reasons for that. First of all, a lot of methane comes from cows, burping cows. Farmers can really be a great ally. to this fight. So that's one thing. But really, the biggest increase in emissions in methane are coming from the burning of natural gas and methane that's escaping unnecessarily. In many cases, these holes can be plugged by companies that are using fossil fuels. That's something that actually can probably be solved pretty easily because a lot of it is just leakage of methane. But we have to force it. We kind of need something similar to what we did with the ozone layer, where we prohibited a certain substance from getting into the atmosphere. And it was very successful. So yeah, the methane problem is a problem. It's probably easier to deal with because it's a little less systemic than the carbon dioxide problem. It's growing, and it's something that we need to tackle. And because methane is 80 times more powerful in the short term than carbon dioxide, the more and more of it is, the worse and worse it gets more quickly.
Is there the political will to act fast enough? It doesn't seem like there has been. Is this report going to give these governments a kick in the pants to get moving?
I don't think the report will, because, I mean, this is the 6th report in 30 years that has basically said the end of the world is coming if we don't turn the ship around, and yet governments have done very little. But I will tell you what will do it. So the future is clean energy. Anybody who can't see that isn't paying attention. So this is happening, and China knows that. China is investing at least double the amount of money in clean energy that the U.S. is. So the bottom line is, if we want to keep pace as an economic power and maintain our superpower status, we're going to have to compete. And that is eventually what is probably going to drive us to invest heavily in green energy, because if we don't, economically, we're going to lose. And every country in the world is going to realize that if they haven't realized it already. This is the future. This is the transition from horse and buggy to cars. And if you're not on board, then you're not going to be an economic superpower in the future.
So money will be a motivator.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. And the economics are there. If you want to, it always is, right? If you are a believer in the market, if you're a believer in capitalism, then you ought to be worried that we're going to be beaten by China, because they are investing a lot more money than we are right now in clean energy. So if we want, we can sit on our, twiddle our thumbs and allow China to run away with this market. But it's certainly not in the best interest of our future. And at the same time, investing more money in clean energy means a cleaner atmosphere. It's better for everyone. So it's just, unfortunately, it's a lot of money still being made off fossil fuels, a lot of old money, and a lot of these people are holding up political processes.
Speaking of political processes, then, we know that COP26, the big UN climate summit that is supposed to be held later this year, will be taking part in Scotland, that those governments will be aware of this report, acutely aware. What can we expect from that summit? So
every several years, as per the Paris Agreement, countries have to come to the table with new pledges. Increased, more motivated, more ambitious pledges to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. So we should expect, hopefully, fingers crossed, some more ambitious pledges from nations. The United States has just kind of pledged what they're going to do, and other countries will likely step forward. Some have already stepped forward. China said they're going to pledge to be, I think, carbon neutral by 2060, US 2050. And so the idea behind Biden being, ambitious is hopefully trying to galvanize other countries and get them to be just as ambitious as we're being. But again, these are pledges. They are not legal agreements. They're not enforceable. And so, countries can say they're going to do this, but they don't actually have to follow through, unfortunately. So I think where we go back to the economics, which is that if this is really one of the industries of the future, then a lot of countries are just going to want to be part of it.
So you have more faith in capitalism than the political process at the moment, it sounds like.
Well, I mean, political process has proved to be really arduous and difficult, especially lately.
And how about us, everyday people in our everyday lives? What can we do?
Well, it's a good question. I would say this. Think about the impact you can make smartly. What I mean by that is you can switch the light bulbs, and you should switch the light bulbs in your apartment, but that's not going to do anything in your house. It's not going to do much, right? But calling your electricity company and saying, hey, I want 100% green power, you can do that. I did that here in New York City. Another thing, and this was some great advice that I got from another climate leader, which was instead of riding a bike to work, which you should do if you can, lobby your city council to put more bike lanes in your city. And instead of trying to convince a climate denier that climate change is real, which you will never do in your lifetime, probably, you know what I mean? It's very hard to do that. Why not convince a friend who already believes in climate change and really, just needs a little motivation to get out there and do some advocacy work, right? So it's thinking smart about the way you influence.
Final question, Jeff. I know you're about to have a child. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you.
How hopeful or scared are you for your child's future?
Well, this child's going to face, multiple challenges, and it's not just climate change. We can see that in the political atmosphere right now across many parts of the world. So yeah, it's concerning. I think, my wife and I thought about it before we had a child. I don't have any answers, other than we just have to prepare our daughter. Her name's going to be Grace, for a tough world, the best that we possibly can. I think that it's easier for me to be a little bit optimistic because I live in a country, where we have great riches. And so we have the best ability to fend off disaster. Whereas these people who live in much poorer countries, it's going to be much harder for them. So that's where we really should be thinking about and focusing a lot of our efforts are on these nations where these people don't have the resources to survive right now, let alone in a much tougher world, which we're headed towards in the next couple of decades.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for breaking this all down for us. As I said before, it's sobering, but...
Yes, and I don't mean to be the Grim Reaper.
No.
If I came across as the Grim Reaper, I don't mean to do that.
No, you didn't. I mean, it is a grim situation, but you also said there is hope. Our actions matter.
There is hope. There is hope. It is true.
Thank you, Jeff, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the CBS This Morning podcast. If you want to catch the day's top stories in under 20 minutes, be sure to subscribe to CBS This Morning News on the Go on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you planning to travel this summer? You need an expert's advice. CBS News travel editor Peter Greenberg is the host of the Eye on Travel podcast. New episodes available every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts.